microphone to the audience. So Ben, in his very interesting talk, started with reminding a bit of the evolution of online exchanges with different examples, and then went on to shifted to talk about the implications of emergent tools that are breaking from digital into physical space between the others. And then we had Raffael that gave us an insight of what happened in Switzerland, with also giving us at the end a history of what is the history of that media we are talking about here these 2 days. I have maybe a first question. Can we carry on with that thing that I'm having the honor of starting with? Yeah, okay. For Ben, I was wondering, yeah, we can either give you the microphone or you have to talk very
like this,
close to the microphone if you use it. I was wondering, you are curator of digital at Serpentine Gallery, and what exactly do you do, and how much does this institution, how much can you orientate the institution to the change that you referred to?
Okay. Is this working? Okay. The change that I'm referring to, I guess the change that I'm referring to is quite a radical one. That's quite difficult for institutions to even start on the road to. I think in terms of producing and commissioning new works and stuff like that, there is definitely a limitation in terms of what's available. I think with the first commission that I'm working on at the moment with Cecile B. Evans, that we are beginning to push the limits of what's technically possible, and attempting to produce a work that recognizes the institution just as maybe a site for something that exists in a much broader context. And in that sense, it's participating in this dialogue around things like post-internet and stuff like that. In terms of like hacker culture and all of that kind of stuff, I mean, you have at the Silicon Valley end of the things that I was talking about, you have places like the New Museum starting a startup incubator space. So this stuff isn't so far removed from an institutional setting. I think where things are probably quite different is in the politics and ethos that might be exercised, and I would say that that's a struggle, and I think that we definitely exist in a moment in which there are certain degrees of compromise that have probably not been fully acknowledged by institutions, but the appointment of me to this particular role obviously demonstrates that there's this kind of need to participate, if not encircle in some way. And I think you see that with, I co-curated the 89+ marathon, and there was a very interesting, just to contextualize that, the 89+ marathon is a 2-day event that's very intense. There's about 70 speakers, performers, and things like that. It's based around Hans Ulrich's and Simone Castet's project, 89+, that looks to map a generation that's coming of age now. How do we exhibit them? How do we think about the work that they're producing? And in that context, curating it, it was very, very interesting the kinds of individuals that I was putting forward and the individuals that the institution was putting forward. And it was quite interesting actually to have an event where you had this very stark contrast between people that are talking, are articulating things like WikiLeaks and stuff with the youngest startup in the world. Like, I think that kind of dialogue is healthy, because I don't think that these things should exist at radical ends of the spectrum. Maybe that's quite a long, rambling answer, but I think it covers some of the stuff.
Sorry, thanks, Ben. Just maybe it's worth reminding everyone that 89+ is a project that gathers performers, artists, and I would say cultural producer that are born after 89. I'm not sure. I mean, it's very obvious for me. I knew about this reference, but maybe we can it's just a side note. But yeah, while I'm at it, and because I'm also really interested in that particular project 89 plus that you didn't mention during your presentation, but I'm glad we can discuss that. Do you think that this project refers, is it just another way to call artists after the internet, or is it a bit broader than that? I'm wondering if, does it imply that it's the new condition of artistic production, or because we're dealing with people born after 89, or can you just, can you explain?
Okay, so it's not my project, first of all. So it's like to give a bit more background. It's like it's framed as a 10-year research project, if not longer, that maps people born in 89 and after. In terms of like this framing of like art after the internet, I think there's one thing that I've experienced of like being in an institution and working with a curator like Dörig, who's operating at quite a high level of the art world from an institutional perspective, is that there is different degrees of understanding of how things exist within history, right? So like post-internet may end up being understood as like minimalism and to define like a specific moment. But from an institutional perspective, there's a desire to like broaden that out and make it more inclusive. So yes, in some ways it's talking about art after the internet, but it also recognizes that there are certain blips within history and that there's an interest, it's potentially interesting to talk about and present the work of a generation from a positive perspective, which I think is really important and would be why I participate in the project. Yeah, I mean, to answer it directly, it is kind of about art after the internet, but something else. Something that's not caught within small communities, but something that's like broader.
Thank you very much. Raffael, I have a question for you. Could you go back to the last example that you gave in Langenthal, which looked very interesting, and could you focus on the dialogue that emerged with the public?
It's a Christoph Wachter and Matthias Jut's project they have these two sides. They are really these working tools, but in the art space they are used to discuss questions. And I think this worked or I know it from the guided tours, that through examples that maybe they had heard of from the news or something like that, and their own use of the internet, they could get to the basic ideas of how these projects work. And that's if I give the examples of Picky there. I just mentioned China, but from China to your own computer, you can come from China to your own computer, because it's not just talking about China, but also about the modes of filtering that you use, for example, just when you use safe search in Google or things like that. So it's an interesting combination that works from people's own experience problems that are more global. But I think what really works, if you present such a thing in an institution, or it's just you get to present it to curious people or people with an interest, and they come with an open mind, I think, quite often.
Which is interesting, because Langenthal is maybe not everybody knows, but it's quite a small city. How big is Langenthal? I don't know, 50,000 or even less? 15,000, okay. So it's quite a challenge, and it's interesting to see that it works. I don't know, are there other questions? Shall we open the discussion to the audience? There is a mobile microphone, another one that can be brought to you if you just raise your hand. Yes, Joël Vacheron, who went to Indeed yesterday, has a question.
Yeah, thank you for these two really insightful talks. That's really brilliant. And I was just wondering, Florian, like if you mentioned like at the beginning of these Swiss scenes, like in the traditional art world, like we know that like from one city to the other, it can be totally different. And I was wondering if there was some distinction, like if the Basel scene was kind of connected with other scene in Switzerland or abroad, like if there was something changing in the observation you could get.
There were other initiatives in Switzerland but I know them less, and I live in Basel, and I know these people, but there was also this point of institutionalization that really happened in Basel at this point around the year 2000. That has something to do with money that was around and politics. As I said, it was kind of this first boom of the World Wide Web, and yeah, it was a moment where there was an interest. But it was also related with some sort of, with these ideas that are having a renaissance also of creative industries and things like that are, or the ideas that this is connected to art.
Please.
I just wondered how you would define institutionalization in the context of a work like Urbaines' vote auction, and whether, because it's like is what's on show last month at like Carol Fletcher in London, and presented in a way that I'd never seen it before. So for people that are not aware, Urbaines is a net art group that's operating in the 90s. They produce a work called Vote Auction that they don't claim responsibility for early on. They structure a narrative of Eastern Bloc countries setting up a website in which Americans can essentially sell their votes, so that you could effectively like rig the American elections. And this was, I think it was like 2001, maybe, like around that time. And they then represented this work as a stack of like cease and desist letters from American government and stuff like that. They essentially get like the NSA to produce a sculpture for them. I wondered how you would, whether you think that's institutionalized when it appears in a commercial gallery, and how you would define it being institutionalized.
Yeah, we happen to have shown the same work at Plugin, but it was shown via the media hack that they did on CNN, when there was a half-an-hour show on CNN around vote auction, and they recorded it and showed it as a video piece. Well, I think in your question, it's rather the question about the market coming in, and yeah, I was more talking about non-profit institutions, and there as probably as enabler of a dialogue. I don't think that this cannot happen in a commercial gallery, but it is like, or I'd compare it to selling performance artifacts, like the manuals for Capro happenings or Capro activities or something like that. It's more like a documentation or an artifact that comes after the work, I think.
Can I define the problem a bit more? Because I think that there's potentially something problematic when you take a work like Marina Abramovich's Rest Energy and you sell that. Like, I think that that's kind of problematic because I think that having something like that on the market takes away from what's interesting about it. But I'm asking a difficult question, right? Like understanding how the work of vote auction is compromised by the market or an institution when they're displaying like the debris that was produced by the US government is like quite a and I think that it's quite important for the present moment for people to understand, because I think a lot of this post-internet stuff and like the newer stuff that's emerging is like, or a lot of the time it's already built for the market, like it's already created to be sold in a gallery. But there was, at least early on, there was this like current of like something Harm van den Dorpel's work, for example, like sculptures, where he considers it to already be rubbish when it enters the gallery space, and that like if a collector were to buy it, then it's their problem, like, you know, whatever, like, you know, feeds him. And I'm kind of interested in respect to that, of like where I'm not trying to define something specific, but I'm just kind of interested in your views, because I actually think that something like vote auction can never be institutionalized, because it presents a framework by which other artists might do very, very compromising things.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, and I think in any case, at the core of this of vote auction, there was this performative work within the realm of mass media. They got the project from a student. They said they bought it from him. They played a role as maverick Eastern European entrepreneurs, and what they did was really a performance on mass media with the climax of this half-an-hour CNN show. And I mean, that's where the art is taking place. But I like that you call it a sculpture by the NSA. So I think it's great if you can do, if you can let them do the work. But this wasn't the idea in the beginning, not at all, to create an artifact. It was, they were taking a huge risk. They had a 5-year ban. They got a 5-year ban to enter the US. They were in debt after all, with all the cost for the lawyers, etc. But I mean, now this all became part of the narrative. So I mean, I'm totally okay with Hans and Liz selling some of the stuff. I think it won't be. They won't get back the money they lost with the project.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting. I don't know if there are some other questions from the audience. It's not that early anymore, so I don't know. But the Campari effect. Oh, there's one question.
Merci. I got a question maybe for Raffael Dörig. I was wondering if what you think art or cultural institutions, more in general, could eventually learn from the experience of such this plug-in sort of historical moment where you dealt with net art. What can be learned maybe for or serve as foundations for cultural institutions now? I mean, to deal with the new digital production, actual digital production. I'm not sure if my question is clear, but
yeah, that's. I mean, I want to encourage institutions to try it. It's of course it's good if you can ask some experts or you have examples from people who have done it before. Now in Basel there's the House of Electronic Arts. Director is also here, and it's good to have, of course, a narrower expert knowledge, but. I think today, if you work with artists who are open to this, you can show it just about everywhere. And then I guess the role of the institution is to make it accessible. That's also what my final picture was about.
Thank you very much. I don't know if there is maybe a last question in the audience. Yes, please.
Yeah, it's a question for Ben. I wonder if I understood what you suggest, that now that basically I don't know, the principle of the conference is that there is no meaningful difference between a real reality and a virtual reality, and you propose that artists occupy the virtual reality instead of kind of keep shifting between real and virtual real, which we have seen. None of the artists who presented their work are actually programmers or hackers, or they don't enter this realm. And I wonder if this would be the radical solution to your institutional proposition, because peer-to-peer only works in the virtual domain.
Okay. So, definition of, I guess one thing that I'd want to address is definition of hackers. I don't necessarily think, I think that hackers have to understand how modern technologies work and stuff like that, but they don't necessarily have to be like an expert Python programmer or anything like that. So I think, but I also think that what I was not trying to suggest is that artists should necessarily adopt all of the skill sets present within other discourse, but rather they should recognize the weight and ability that has become manifest through that kind of work, and begin to acknowledge that if you want to participate in a broader dialogue and actually begin to make real impact, that there is a need to shift between gesture and action. And the reason why I brought up Urbaines is because I think I would actually describe the lack of canonization for net art from the 90s as a crime within art history all the time that the canon exists, because it led to this really weird situation where you have lots of young artists basically reinventing the wheel and re-encountering all of the problems that were kind of worked out in the early 90s. So what I was trying to do was a kind of constructive provocation to say that had net artists working in the 90s been recognized for the work they were doing, then we would have a much more mature, developed discourse within art now. I think it's the kind of crime on the scale of something like Internet Explorer, where you end up like wasting the time of millions of people over the course of the last 2 decades. And the other thing is, in terms of the definition between virtual worlds and virtual space and things like that, I think I'm probably a little bit biased because I grew up in an online world. I spent like 6 years of my life, and from about 2 years into that experience, ceased to make any definition between the two things, and later learned that everything that was functioning within a microeconomy and communities in that world was very, very similar to what I experienced on the outside. So I find it just to pile on the oddity of that. There's things that exist within the art market that don't make any sense, like people being like, well, can we buy it because it's digital? People are buying things from iTunes. Like, people have been buying like startups for forever. These things that like are assumed to be immaterial but have had a place within a larger free market for a long period of time. I really don't understand why it's taken the art world so long to be like, oh, we can buy this and speculate on it and probably profit from it in the future. So I think there's lots of, that may not have been a direct answer, but there's things in it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answer. I think you had a question also, huh? And maybe that's the last one.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Ben, how your ideas about organizational changes resonate within the organization at the Serpentine, since your director or co-director also hosts events at Art Basel Miami, for instance. Exactly, with Kanye West. So I was wondering how your ideas resonate within that organization.
I love this question, and it's always people like you who ask it on, like, in situations like this, and I still don't have a stock answer. So what I will say is that I think that the compromises that will be made between, I understand myself as playing a role in figuring out what compromise looks like between an institution and a network. And maybe I've tasked myself with that because I have some idea, and I've spent quite a lot of time thinking about what responsibility looks like in that capacity. And it's kind of odd that I'm there, right? And I'm saying this stuff. And I guess the gamble that I'm making is that I really do believe in this instance that the things that I'm working on and other people are working on will significantly change the way in which we organize society in a way, and this might sound like utopian drivel, but like look at Bitcoin and stuff like that. It is actually, like, with a lot of people are starting to realize that change is very real. And I guess the gamble that I'm making, that like if the institution doesn't like it, then get rid of me. But I think that actually we're probably at the point where those compromises are starting to look very real, and that it makes sense to sit down and have a dialogue and an honest conversation and say, okay, so this is the things that we can do, these are the things that you can do, these are the things I don't like you doing, these are the things that you might not like us doing, and we need to draw some like very specific lines of where that is. This may mean that I get fired, but I'm okay with that.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Raffael. Thank you very much, Ben, and the audience for your attention and questions. We are now having a 15 minutes break. Please kind of try to respect the 15 minutes, and let's be back at 11:45 for the last session of this symposium. Thank you very much.